When his fingers touched my face, I felt the world collapse around me. The entire hall froze, hundreds of eyes fixed on us like sharp daggers. "Tell me who you really are," he whispered, his grave voice cutting through the silence like thunder on a dark night. Blood pulsed in my ears as tears threatened to fall. In that moment, with the truth about to be revealed before the entire court, I understood that some lies are prisons we build with our own hands, and mine had just crumbled. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I found them trembling under the snow, 3 small creatures huddled by the trunk of an ancient oak, where the wind seemed crueler and the silence deeper. Their damp fur blended with the white of the ground, and the sound of their whimpers broke something inside me. Something I had long believed dead. That forest was forbidden territory marked by the king's guards, yet my steps led me there as if something invisible called to me. When I knelt and touched the weakest of them, I felt the faint warmth of a life that resisted. And, perhaps for the first time, I wished someone had found me that way too. Lost, wounded, still pulsing under the ice. Since the fall of my home, no one spoke my name without scorn. I was the mute servant in the corridors, the orphan brought to the castle out of pity, the one who served wine and cleaned the goblets of the nobles. The ladies looked at me as one observes an unwelcome shadow. The young warriors laughed when I passed, calling me Omega, the last link in a social chain where nothing belonged to me. But on that cold morning, with the pups in my arms and my breath rising in trembling clouds, something changed. I felt the world watching me. Not human faces, but the forest itself, the sky, the earth. As if destiny had leaned in, curious, over me. My story began long before that morning in the forest. I was born the daughter of a small landholder in the far north, where the mountains touch the sky and winters devour the weak. My father, a man of honor and few words, maintained our family with dignity, despite the meager harvests and rising taxes. My mother, with hands as soft as rare flower petals, told me stories at night, while the snow battered our windows. Stories of ancient creatures that inhabited the forest, of pacts sealed with blood, of destinies etched in the stars. It was on a night like any other that the king's men came. The sound of hooves in the courtyard, the gleam of torches piercing through the cracks in our door. I remember my father's face hardening, my mother's eyes filling with silent tears. "Hide," she whispered, pushing me into the trapdoor beneath the worn rug. "Don't come out until everything is silent." Time inside that dark hole felt eternal. I heard screams, pleas, the sound of metal against metal. Then only heavy silence and the smell of smoke. When I finally had the courage to emerge, our house was ablaze, flames licking the night sky. My parents lay in the courtyard, their bodies still beneath the snow that had begun to fall. I was only 12 years old, and that night I lost everything. I never knew for sure why our family was destroyed. They spoke of betrayal, of secrets kept for generations, of an ancient amulet my father was said to have hidden. Truth or lie, it mattered little to an orphaned girl, alone in a world where power decided who lived and who died. I wandered for days until I was found by a group of merchants heading south. A woman among them with tired eyes and calloused hands took me under her protection. "Lara," she would say, "life breaks us all, but some choose to put their own pieces back together." She taught me to survive, to go unnoticed, to serve without being seen. When we reached the capital, she secured me a place among the castle's servants. "Keep your head down and your ears open," were her last words before she departed with the caravan, and so I did. For 5 years, I was merely a shadow in the stone corridors. I learned every secret passage, every noble's routine, every powerful figure's weakness. I observed in silence as I washed the floors, served the banquets, changed the bed linens. The castle was a world apart with its own rules and hierarchies. At the top, undisputed and feared, was the Alpha King. No one knew for certain where the title came from. Some said it was because of how he dominated the men around him. Others whispered about ancestral powers that ran in his blood. What I knew was only what my eyes could see, a man of overwhelming presence. Grey eyes that seemed to see through one's soul. and a solitude that emanated from him like a cold aura. Stories of his cruelty were told in whispers through the corridors. They said he had killed his own brother to take the throne, that he kept prisoners in the deepest dungeons, that no woman had ever managed to awaken any feeling in him beyond indifference. He was feared by all, from the humblest servants to the most powerful lords. The royal advisor, Lady Eleanor, was the only one who dared speak to him as an equal. Tall, with impeccably pinned silver hair, she commanded the castle with an iron fist. It was she who decided which servants would be kept and which dismissed, which nobles would have an audience with the king and which would be ignored. Her cold gaze had fallen upon me a few times, evaluating me as one examines an insignificant insect. On that winter morning, when I found the pups in the forest, I was supposed to be gathering herbs for the kitchen. Snow had covered everything with its cruel white mantle, and the silence was broken only by the biting wind between the trees. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible, like a sigh of surrender. I followed the sound to the old oak where the three of them were. They were not dogs, nor wolves, nor any creature I had ever seen before. They had silver fur, almost translucent, delicate paws, and elongated snouts. Their eyes, when they opened to stare at me, was such a deep blue that they seemed to contain the sky itself. I remembered my mother's stories of the mystical creatures that inhabited the northern forests. Snow spirits, she called them. Rare beings that appeared only to those destined for great changes. I removed my shawl and carefully wrapped the three creatures. They did not resist, as if they knew I posed no danger. The smallest of them, trembling more than the others, nestled against my neck, its breath light and warm against my skin. In that moment, I felt a connection that transcended explanation, as if, in some way, our souls recognized each other. The walk back to the castle was tense. If anyone saw me carrying the pups, I would be accused of breaking the royal decree that prohibited hunting or capturing any forest creature. But I couldn't let them die. Something within me, stronger than fear, compelled me to protect them. I took them, hidden, to the royal stables. The warmth of the torches and the smell of hay muffled the cold. When I thought I was alone, a deep voice cut through the air like a blade. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. He was there, the Alpha King, tall, enveloped in shadows, his black cloak weighing on his broad shoulders. His eyes, grey as newly polished steel, fell on the pups and then on me. Neither of us moved. It was as if time had forgotten to continue. I tried to speak, but my voice dissolved. He took a step forward, and the sound of his boots on the ground echoed with authority. The torchlight trembled, as if it too feared that man. "They would have died out there," I finally whispered. For an instant, the hardness of his face softened. The king looked at the creatures sleeping in my lap, and the air between us became thick, alive. "Compassion is not a common virtue in this place," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "And it rarely comes from mouths that serve in silence." His eyes met mine, and something strange happened. It was as if, for a brief moment, I could see beyond the mask of power he wore. There was pain there, ancient and deep. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice suddenly softer. "Lara, Your Majesty," I replied, surprised that he cared. "Lara," he repeated, as if tasting the sound on his tongue. "Do you know what these creatures are?" I hesitated. My mother's stories were considered superstition by the learned men of the court, but something told me the king would understand. My mother called them snow spirits, sir. She said they only appeared to those marked by destiny. An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Your mother was a wise woman." Then, he extended his hand, lightly touching the pup sleeping in my lap. "These are likoi, ancient creatures that inhabited these lands long before men. I thought they had disappeared generations ago." I remained silent, amazed that he would share such knowledge with me. "A simple servant. You brought them to the royal stables." "Breaking my own decree," he continued, his voice regaining its hardness. "Do you know what that means?" I swallowed hard. "The penalty for disobeying a direct order from the king could range from exile to death." "Yes, Your Majesty, but I do not regret it," I replied, lifting my chin with a courage I didn't know I possessed. "Some lives are worth the risk." His eyes narrowed, studying me with renewed intensity. For a long moment, he simply watched me as if trying to decipher an ancient riddle. Then, to my surprise, he leaned down and removed his black cloak from his shoulders, spreading it over the pups. "Keep them here, hidden," he ordered. "I will return at nightfall." And so, as suddenly as he had appeared, the Alpha King vanished into the darkness, leaving me trembling not just from fear, but from something more complex that I couldn't name. I spent the day divided between my duties in the castle and furtive visits to the stables. The pups were beginning to regain their strength, accepting the warm milk I brought them. The smallest of them, whom I secretly named Frost, seemed to have a special bond with me, following me with his eyes whenever I approached. As the sun dipped below the horizon, anxiety grew in my chest. Would the king return as he promised? And if he did, what would be my sentence? I tried to prepare for the worst, but a strange calm had settled in me since the encounter in the forest, as if finally I was on the path I should always have followed. Twilight tinged the sky red when I heard footsteps approaching the stables. They were not the king's firm, heavy steps, but light and calculated. The door opened, and my heart stopped beating for an instant. It was Eleanor, the royal advisor. Her cold eyes swept the room until they fixed on me, kneeling beside the pups. "So the rumors are true," she said, her tone as sharp as ice. "The filthy servant who dares to defy the laws of the realm." I rose slowly, placing myself between her and the creatures. "Lady Eleanor, Silence," she cut in, advancing. "Do you think we haven't noticed your glances, your small audacities? Servants like you should be grateful for every day you are allowed to breathe under this roof." The hatred in her voice caught me by surprise. What had I done to provoke such fury? "The Lycoi belong to the forest, not to dirty hands like yours," she continued, drawing closer. "They are sacred, part of a legacy you will never comprehend." Her slender fingers gripped my chin with surprising strength. "The king may have been fooled by your false innocence, but I see through you, girl. I see the poison that runs in your veins, the same that ran in your father's." Her words struck me like lightning. She had known my father. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my entire body trembling. A cruel smile twisted her perfect face. "Do you really think your arrival at this castle was a coincidence? That no one knows who you truly are?" Before I could answer, a shadow filled the stable door. The king was there, imposing against the dying light of dusk. His gaze passed from Eleanor to me, then to the pups who were now stirring, restless. "Advisor," his voice was pure ice. "I don't recall requesting your presence here." Eleanor straightened up, releasing my face. The respect and fear in her eyes were evident, but there was something more, an intimacy, a mutual understanding that spoke of years of coexistence. "Your Majesty, I was merely ensuring that royal decrees were respected," she replied, softening her tone. "This servant, this young woman is under my protection," he interrupted, stepping into the stables. "As are these creatures." The shock on the advisor's face would have been comical in any other circumstance, but in that moment I felt only a chill down my spine. What did it mean to be under the king's protection? "Your Majesty, with all due respect, the Lycoi are sacred creatures of the royal lineage. To allow a common servant to handle them? There is nothing common about her," the king said, his eyes fixed on mine, "or she would not have been able to find them." A charged silence fell upon us. Eleanor seemed to struggle against words she desperately wished to utter. Finally, she bowed in a rigid curtsy. "As you wish, my king. But I ask you to consider the implications. The council will not be pleased." "The council serves the crown, not the other way around," he replied coldly. With a final look of disdain in my direction, the advisor withdrew, her quick steps echoing in the distance. When we were finally alone, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "She knew my father," I murmured, still stunned by the revelation. The king did not seem surprised. He approached the pups, kneeling to examine them. His movements were surprisingly gentle for someone known for his brutality. "Eleanor knows many secrets," he said finally. "Some that should remain buried." Frost, the smallest of the pups, extended a hesitant paw toward the king. To my surprise, he allowed the touch, a slight smile softening his austere features. "They are recovering well," he observed. You have a talent for healing." "I only did what anyone would do," I replied. "No," his voice was firm. "Anyone else would have left them to die, fearing my wrath more than their own conscience. You chose the difficult path." He rose, his height dominating the space. The torchlight danced on his face, highlighting strong angles and subtle scars that spoke of past battles. "Tomorrow at dawn, you will report to my chambers," he ordered. "I have a proposal to make." "A proposal, sir?" His grey eyes studied me with an almost painful intensity. "The Lycoi need care that only someone with northern blood can offer, and I need eyes and ears where mine cannot reach." With these enigmatic words, he turned to leave. At the door, he paused for an instant. "Trust no one within these walls. Lara, especially those who seem to know your past better than you do." And so, I was left alone again, with 3 pups, a confused heart, and unanswered questions echoing in my mind. Something was in motion, pieces of a game I didn't know I was playing, and somehow I had become one of them. The night passed slowly and restlessly. I dozed among the hay bales in the stables, waking at every sound, every shadow. The pups nestled against my body, their small hearts beating in sync with mine. When the first rays of sun streaked the horizon, I was already awake, trying to organize my thoughts and prepare for the meeting with the king. I used water from the fountain to wash my face and hands, tidied my simple dress as best I could. I had no fine clothes or courtly manners, just the raw honesty my father had always valued. "Truth stands on its own," he used to say. "It's lies that need adornments." The walk to the royal chambers never seemed so long. Every corridor, every staircase seemed to watch my passage with invisible eyes. The few servants I encountered averted their gaze as if my misfortune were contagious. News travelled fast in the service corridors. Everyone knew I had broken a royal decree, but no one knew the king himself had granted me a private audience. 2 guards flanked the massive door to the king's chambers. Their impassive faces studied me with suspicion as I approached. "The king requested my presence," I said, proud that my voice hadn't trembled. One of them knocked on the door and announced me. A moment later, the door opened, revealing not the king, but an elderly man in simple robes who invited me in with a silent gesture. The royal chambers were different from what I imagined. No excessive ostentation or opulent luxury. There was an elegant sobriety, with robust, dark wood furniture, ancient tapestries on the walls, and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled. Large windows offered a view of the forest and distant mountains, framed by deep blue curtains. The king stood by one of the windows, observing the horizon. When he heard me enter, he turned slowly. In the clear morning light, he looked different. Less a figure of legends and more a man of flesh and blood, with weight on his shoulders and weariness in his eyes. "Lara," he said, dismissing the servant with a gesture. "You came." "As ordered, Your Majesty," I replied, making an awkward curtsy. An almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't an order, but an invitation. "You could have fled during the night, taking the pups." "And where would I flee?" I asked, with a sincerity that surprised me. "There is no safe place for me outside these walls." He nodded, as if my answer confirmed something he already suspected. "Come." He indicated a table where a map was open. "I want to show you something." I approached hesitantly. The map showed the kingdom and its borders, marked with symbols I didn't understand. "You come from the north?" It wasn't a question. "From the province of Myrthil, near the Ice Peak Mountains. Your father was Theon, Lord of the Borderlands." The shock must have been evident on my face, for he continued. "Yes, I knew your father. A man of principles in an era when such men became rare." My throat went dry. For years I had hidden my identity, fearing retaliation against a traitor's daughter. How could the king know? "If you knew who I am, why did you allow me to serve in your castle all these years?" His eyes met mine, intense and unfathomable. "Why do you think you were brought here, Lara?" The question hung in the air, laden with implications. I had never truly questioned the chance that led me to the castle after my parents' death. I was just a frightened girl, grateful for a roof and food. "The woman who brought me?" I began, recalling the tired-eyed merchant. "My agent," the king confirmed, "instructed to find you and bring you to safety. It was no coincidence." My world seemed to spin. All these years, all the humiliations and deprivations, all part of some plan I didn't know about. Why? I managed to ask, my voice little more than a whisper. The king sighed, a heavy sound laden with years. Your father guarded a secret, Lara. A secret for which he was killed. Not by me, he quickly added, seeing my expression, but by those who desired the power such a secret could grant. He pointed to a specific spot on the map, near the mountains where I was born. Here, in the caves beneath your old home, there is a sanctuary, a sacred place for the Likoi, where, according to legends, the first pact between men and mystical creatures was sealed. Your father was the guardian of that sanctuary, as his grandfather before him. Memories blurred by time surfaced in my mind, my father disappearing for hours on full moon nights, returning with snow in his hair and a strange glint in his eyes. My mother's stories, which always seemed more than simple children's tales. The men who came that night, they weren't yours? They were Eleanor's men, he replied, bitterness tinging his voice. She acted without my knowledge, convinced that your father was planning a rebellion. When I discovered the truth, it was already too late. Tears burned my eyes. All the pain, all the loss, caused by a woman who now looked at me with scorn in the castle corridors. Why tell me this now? I asked, struggling to maintain composure. Why not before? He approached, his gaze softening in a way I had never witnessed. Because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if you were truly your father's daughter, if you carried not only his blood but his courage, his compassion. Yesterday, when I found you protecting those pups, risking everything for creatures you barely knew, I had my answer. He extended his hand, lightly touching my face with surprisingly gentle fingers. You are the last guardian, Lara, the only one who can restore the pact, bring balance to a world heading for chaos. The intensity of his words, the weight of the revelation was almost unbearable. Years of believing I was no one, only to discover I carried a legacy greater than I could imagine. I don't understand. What does this mean? What should I do? He withdrew his hand, turning back to the window. The sun now shone fully, flooding the room with golden light. It means that from today, you are no longer a servant. You will assume a new position at court as my protégé. You will learn what you need to know, reclaim what was stolen from you, and then, when you are ready. He didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. A lifetime of unanswered questions began to make sense. The strange dreams of snowy forests, the ease with which I always connected with animals, the constant feeling of not truly belonging to that world. Eleanor won't allow this, I observed, thinking of the advisor's rage. A cold smile touched the king's lips. Eleanor serves the crown, and the crown makes its own decisions. The news spread quickly. In court, they said the servant had defied the royal decree, that her insolence would be punished with exile. I saw the glances multiply in the corridors, the muffled laughter, the poison whispered in the seams of power. The royal advisor, a lady of sharp words, demanded that the king judge me before everyone, so I would learn my place. On the night of the audience, the hall torches cast long shadows over the marble, and the cold seemed to come from within the walls. I was called to the front of the throne, the pups still alive, wrapped in a worn cloak. The throne room was packed. Nobles, knights, representatives from distant provinces, all gathered to witness my judgment. I felt small under so many gazes, but something had changed in me since my conversation with the king that morning. A silent certainty, a rediscovered purpose. Eleanor stood beside the throne, her face a perfect mask of serenity, but her eyes burned with contained fury. She whispered something into the king's ear as I approached, but he ignored her, keeping his eyes fixed on me. Lara, daughter of Theon, he announced, his voice filling the entire hall. You have been brought before this court, accused of violating a royal decree by removing creatures from the Forbidden Forest. How do you respond to this accusation? A murmur rippled through the hall. Daughter of Theon. He had publicly revealed my identity, something I had worked so hard to conceal. I felt curious glances, confused whispers. Few remembered the Lord of the North. Fewer still knew his daughter served among them. Yes, Your Majesty, I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. I found these pups dying in the snow and could not let them perish. The pup stirred in my arms as if understanding what was at stake. Frost, the smallest of them, raised his snout, his blue eyes fixed on the king. "Show them to the court," he ordered. Carefully, I unfolded the cloak, revealing the three creatures. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Even those who had never seen a Lycoy recognized they were in the presence of something extraordinary. "Lycoy," someone murmured. "I thought they had disappeared centuries ago." "Sacred creatures," whispered another. The king rose, descending the throne steps to approach me. The sound of his cloak rustling on the floor silenced everyone. When he raised his hand, I thought a blow was coming. Instead, he placed it on my head with a solemn and unthinkable gesture. "They say the title of Luna belongs to one who guards life with courage," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "And this young woman, whom many call Omega, has proven more worthy than many who call themselves nobles." The hall froze. The ladies exchanged glances, the lords paled. I didn't know how to respond. His touch burned, not with pain, but with something ancient, as if an invisible mark were being etched upon me. "From today, no one will dare call you less," the king concluded. For before snow and death, she was the only one to choose life. Eleanor advanced, her face contorted in a mask of barely contained indignation. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, the title of Luna is reserved for—" "I know the meaning of the title very well." "Advisor," the king interrupted, his tone as sharp as freshly broken ice, "just as I know it is my right to grant it to whomever I deem worthy." The pup slept, warm in my arms, oblivious to the destiny I had just received. And as the king returned to the throne, I noticed the look he cast at me before sitting. It was not the look of a king to a subject, nor of predator to prey. It was the look of someone who recognizes something they lack. That night, the castle windows rattled with the wind. I did not sleep. The word Luna echoed in my mind as impossible as a dream. Perhaps tomorrow the world would return to what it was. Perhaps the king would regret his gesture. But within me, something had already shifted. And no one, not even he, would be able to return me to the silence of before. The following days were a whirlwind. I was moved from the servants' quarters and installed in a chamber in the east wing of the castle, an elegant room with windows overlooking the inner garden. Servants who had previously ignored me now waited on me, bowing awkwardly, uncertain how to treat someone who had risen so drastically in the castle hierarchy. The pups were brought to a small sunroom adjacent to my room, where they could play under the weak winter sun without being disturbed. They grew quickly, their distinct personalities emerging each day. Frost, the smallest, remained my favourite. He followed me like a silver shadow, sleeping at the foot of my bed, alert to any movement. The title of Luna stirred curiosity and resentment in equal measure. In the kingdom's ancient stories, the Luna was the king's spiritual advisor, the guardian of mystical secrets, the bridge between the world of men and the world of ancient creatures. But for generations, the title had been purely ceremonial, granted to noble ladies of impeccable lineage, who did little beyond participating in rituals emptied of meaning. That the king had granted it to me, a servant, an orphan, a foreigner, was an insult to many, especially to the three young ladies who had been considered for the position. Lady Elise, daughter of a powerful duke, Lady Maeve, Eleanor's own niece, and Lady Celeste, a distant cousin of the king. Known for her ethereal beauty and calculating eyes, they formed an inseparable trio, and never missed an opportunity to humiliate me whenever the king was not present. "Look, the street cat got a golden collar," Lady Elise sneered when she found me in the corridor. "How long until your stable smell drives away even those strange creatures you carry around?" Her friends giggled, their thin, artificial laughs echoing in the stone walls. "I can't imagine what she had to do to gain such favour from the king," Lady Maeve whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "But it certainly wasn't her intelligence or grace." I remained silent, as I had learned to do during years of servitude. But something had changed in me. It was no longer just resignation. It was a calculated patience, a certainty that such words now bounced off an invisible armour that had begun to form around me. Lessons began the day after the ceremony. The king assigned 3 tutors, Master Aldrich, an elderly man with bright eyes, to teach me history and court protocol. Madame Lyra, a middle-aged woman with calloused hands and a stern gaze, for instruction on medicinal herbs and forest lore, and, to my surprise, the king himself, who reserved an hour at dusk for what he called survival lessons. These last were the ones that most intrigued and frightened me. The king would take me to a secret room in the lower levels of the castle, where ancient scrolls covered the walls and strange symbols were carved into the stone floor. "What happened to your father was no accident," he said during our first lesson. "It was part of an ancient war, which continues in the shadows to this day. A war for control of the forces that sustain this kingdom." "What forces?" I asked, observing the symbols beneath my feet. "Magic," he replied simply. "Not the common magic of fair charlatans, but the deep connection to the earth, to creatures, to the very fabric of reality. Your father was one of the few who still kept that connection alive." The king paced around the room, his grave voice echoing in the stone walls. "For generations, the lords of the north were the guardians of this tradition. While the south embraced gold and political power, the north preserved knowledge older than the kingdom itself. Your grandfather taught me much of what I know, before ambition and fear began to poison the court." I vaguely recalled a visitor to our home, a tall man with serious eyes, who spoke at length with my father on winter nights. Could it be that the king himself, then a prince, had been that visitor? "The Lycoi are just the beginning," he continued. "There are other creatures, other forces. And there are those who wish to control or destroy what they don't understand. Eleanor is just the visible face of a larger group that has been moving in the shadows for decades." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Why do you trust me?" He stopped, his grey eyes fixed on mine. "Because your blood carries the truth. Because your eyes see what others cannot. And because, unlike many, you did not desire power, you simply chose to protect what is fragile and true." He approached, placing something in my hands, a small bluish crystal, cold to the touch. "This is a fragment of the moonstone which your father protected. I want you to keep it with you always." The crystal pulsed faintly between my fingers as if it had a life of its own. "How will I know what to do with it?" I asked, feeling a strange tingling where the stone touched my skin. "You won't know," he replied with a slight smile. "It will know. The crystal is merely a conduit for something that already exists within you." Weeks passed, transforming winter into a timid spring. The pups grew, becoming agile and playful. Frost developed an intense silver sheen in his fur, and his blue eyes seemed to hold knowledge beyond his age. The other two, whom I named Mist and Echo, were more reserved with me, but equally fascinating. My position at court remained ambiguous. Officially Luna, but treated with disdain by many and cautious curiosity by others. Eleanor kept her distance, but I felt her eyes following me through the corridors, observing every movement, every interaction. The three ladies continued their small cruelties, spreading rumours about my origin, questioning my virtue, suggesting that my ascent was a result of impure favours granted to the king. On a particularly warm afternoon, as the gardens exploded in colour after the long winter, I was informed that the king had called a banquet for that night. All the court nobles would be present, as would envoys from neighbouring kingdoms, and I, as Luna, was expected to attend. Lady Maeve met me in the corridor on my way to my chambers, her smile as sharp as a dagger. "Eager for the banquet, Luna?" she asked, the last word practically spat. "It will certainly be a spectacle to see the servant trying to use silver cutlery." I ignored her, continuing on my way, but she followed me. You know, everyone is betting on how long it will take for the king to tire of his new toy. Some say a month, others think he already regrets it but is too proud to admit it. I stopped, turning to face her. Something in my eyes must have changed, for I saw a flicker of uncertainty on her perfect face. "And you, Lady Maeve, how long do you think it will take for Eleanor to tire of using you as her puppet?" The words escaped before I could contain them, her face pale, then flushed with anger. "How dare you! You know nothing about me or my aunt." I took a step closer, feeling a strange calm envelop me. "I know more than you imagine. I know your aunt cares about no one but herself. I know she would use anyone, including you, to achieve her goals. And I know that, behind all that venom, there is only fear. Something gleamed in my pocket, the crystal the king had given me, warming against my skin. A sudden wind blew through the corridor despite the closed windows, rustling the curtains and making the torches flicker. Lady Maeve recoiled, an expression of genuine fear in her eyes. "Witch," she whispered. "Is that what he saw in you? Dark magic?" Before I could answer, she quickly walked away, almost running down the corridor. I stood there, trembling slightly, uncertain of what had just happened. The crystal cooled again in my pocket as if falling back asleep. When I reached my chambers, I found a dress laid out on the bed, deep blue like the night sky, with small silver beads that resembled stars. A note accompanied the garment written in a firm hand. "For the Luna of the realm, wear it tonight." It was unsigned, but I recognized the king's handwriting. The gesture touched me more deeply than I expected. It wasn't just a dress, it was a symbol that, despite the rumors and machinations, he kept his word. The banquet was grand, like all court events. The main hall was decorated with spring flowers, and musicians played cheerful melodies as servants circulated with trays of food and wine. My heart beat fast as I entered, aware of the gazes that turned in my direction. The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made especially for me. The king sat at the head table, conversing with a foreign-looking man. When he saw me, something in his eyes changed, a spark of recognition, perhaps admiration. He indicated the empty seat to his left, a position of honor that made the courtiers murmur in disapproval. "Luna," he said as I approached, loud enough for others to hear, "you honor this court with your presence." I made the curtsy Madame Lyra had taught me, trying to ignore the furious glances of Eleanor, who sat on the other side of the table. "Your Majesty," I simply replied. The foreign man observed me with evident curiosity. "Is this the young woman you spoke to me about?" he asked the king, his accent revealing distant origins. "Yes, Ambassador," the king confirmed. "Luna, allow me to introduce Lord Caelan, envoy from the Kingdom of Eastmarch." The ambassador bowed slightly, his dark eyes studying me with uncomfortable intensity. "It is an honor to meet the new Luna of the realm. Stories of your unusual ascent have already crossed our borders." Something in the way he emphasized the word unusual put me on alert, but I maintained the diplomatic smile Master Aldrich had taught me. "I hope the stories also mention my gratitude for our king's wisdom," I replied, choosing my words carefully. Dinner proceeded with the formal tension typical of court events. Wine flowed generously, and with it tongues began to loosen. Lady Celeste, seated a few chairs away, cast venomous glances at me over her goblet, while Lady Elise whispered something to a young lord who chuckled discreetly. It was during dessert that the first move was made. Eleanor rose gracefully, her goblet raised in a toast. "Your Majesty, if I may," her melodious voice silenced the hall, "I would like to propose a toast to spring, which finally blesses us after a long winter, and to the new flowers that emerge in our garden." Her gaze slid to me, a cold smile on her lips. Some flowers, though exotic, are short-lived. They bloom intensely and soon wither, leaving only the memory of their brief beauty. The king tensed imperceptibly beside me. I noticed his jaw clench, but before he could intervene, I also rose, my own goblet in my hands. "A perceptive observation, Lady Eleanor," I replied, surprising everyone, including myself. "But as a daughter of the North, I have learned that the most resilient flowers are those that survive the ice, not by the delicacy of their petals, but by the strength of their roots." A surprised silence fell over the hall. Eleanor paled slightly while the king watched me with a mixture of astonishment and approval. "To deep roots, then," I concluded, raising my goblet higher. "May they sustain what seems fragile, but is in truth indestructible." The ambassador was the first to raise his goblet in response. A slight smile on his lips. "To deep roots," he repeated, and others joined the toast. Some reluctantly, others genuinely impressed. When I sat back down, I felt the king's hand briefly touch mine under the table, a gesture as discreet as it was significant. "You surprise me every day, Luna," he murmured, "for my ears only." The rest of the night passed without further direct confrontations, but I could feel the change in the atmosphere. What had begun as a night of planned humiliation for me had transformed into something different. Some nobles, previously distant, now watched me with renewed interest. Others, more prudent, recalculated their alliances. When the banquet ended, the king announced that he would accompany the ambassador to his chambers for private discussions. Before leaving, he leaned toward me. "Tomorrow at dawn. The lesson will be different. Be prepared." I nodded, not knowing what to expect, but trusting his judgment more and more. As I watched him walk away, I noticed Eleanor staring at me from across the hall, her gaze more calculating than ever. The battle was just beginning, and I had just announced that I would not be an easy victim. Dawn arrived with dense fog covering the gardens. I wore simple, sturdy clothes, as I had learned during my lessons with Madame Lyra. The crystal, which I now always carried in a small leather pouch around my neck, felt colder than usual. Frost accompanied me to the door of my chambers, but recoiled when I tried to take him with me. His blue eyes seemed to say, "This path is yours alone," and for the first time, I felt that the Lycoi understood much more than they showed. The king awaited me in the inner courtyard, also dressed simply: leather pants, worn boots, an unadorned tunic, without his crown, and royal cloak. He seemed younger and less distant, though his presence remained imposing. "Today I will not be your king, nor will you be Luna," he said, handing me a travelling cloak. "We will be merely two travellers in search of answers." "Answers to what questions?" I inquired, as I draped the cloak over my shoulders. An enigmatic smile touched his lips. "To the questions you don't yet know you have." We left the castle through a discreet passage, avoiding the guards and servants who were already beginning their morning duties. 2 horses awaited us beyond the walls, not majestic royal steeds, but sturdy, unadorned animals that would not attract attention. We rode in silence through the forest surrounding the city, the fog swallowing the sounds of hooves and our outlines. The king led the way with the confidence of one who knew every tree, every stone. After almost an hour, we reached a clearing where ancient ruins emerged among the vegetation. Broken columns, partially collapsed arches, symbols carved into stone worn by time. "The Temple of the 3 Moons," he said, dismounting. "One of the sacred places that existed even before the founding of the kingdom." I followed his example, looking around with awe and apprehension. There was a strange energy in the air, like electricity before a storm. "Why did you bring me here?" He approached one of the columns, running his fingers over the carved symbols. "Because it's time for you to begin to remember." I frowned, confused. "Remember what? What is in your blood? The knowledge that has been passed down through generations in your family, even when you weren't conscious of it." He indicated a circle of stones in the center of the ruins. In the middle of it, a circular slab with carved spirals radiated from a central point. "Sit there," he instructed, "and take out the crystal." I obeyed hesitantly. The stone beneath me was surprisingly warm, as if absorbing the sun's heat, although the day was still cloudy. I took the crystal from my neck, holding it in the palm of my hand. "Now close your eyes," the king's voice sounded close. "Breathe deeply, and allow the crystal to awaken what already exists within you." I closed my eyes, feeling foolish and uncertain. For a long moment nothing happened, just the cold wind on my skin, the smell of damp earth, the light weight of the crystal between my fingers. Then, something changed. The crystal suddenly grew warm, and with the warmth came a flood of images, so vivid they overshadowed reality. My father kneeling in this same circle, his hand on my childish head, a cave lit by crystals similar to the one I held, adult Lycoi, majestic and wild, running under the moonlight, and an ethereal woman with eyes identical to mine, whispering words in a language I didn't know but instinctively understood. I gasped, opening my eyes. The king was kneeling before me, observing me intensely. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "My father." "This place? A woman who looked like me?" He nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "Your grandmother. She was the last true Luna, before the title became an empty honor. She came from the ancient people, those who first sealed the pact with the Lycoi and other mystical creatures. I don't understand. Why don't I remember her? The king sighed, sitting before me in the stone circle. She died before your birth. But in this place, the veil between past and present is thinner. The crystal allows you to access memories that are not yours, but are etched in your blood. I looked at the crystal, which now pulsed with a bluish glow. So that's why Eleanor wants to destroy me? Because I represent a lineage she fears. Not just that, he replied, his face hardening. Eleanor belongs to an ancient order that believes mystical power should be controlled only by a chosen few. They see creatures as mere tools, magic as a weapon to be mastered. Your family always represented the opposite, the belief that men and creatures should live in balance, that magic belongs to no one, but flows through everyone. The wind picked up around us, rustling the trees. The sky suddenly darkened, as if a storm was approaching. But how could I pose any threat? I asked. I'm just an orphan who spent her life serving others. The king rose, extending his hand to help me up. You are much more than that, Lara. And Eleanor knows it. That's why she tried to eliminate your family. That's why, when she discovered you had survived and were in the castle, she began to plot against you. Thunder echoed in the distance, as if underscoring his words. We need to go back, he said, looking at the sky. A storm is coming, and not just in the sky. As we rode back to the castle, faster than we had come, my mind raced with questions. The images I saw in the temple, the king's revelations, Eleanor's growing hostility, everything connected in a complex web that I was only beginning to comprehend. What happens now? I asked, as the castle walls appeared on the horizon. The king cast a serious look over his shoulder. Now you train, you learn, you prepare, because soon Eleanor will make her move. And when that happens, you will need to be ready. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold against my skin as the castle rose before us, no longer a refuge, but a battlefield where power games and ancient secrets would collide. And I, who was once just a shadow in the corridors, had become a central piece in this deadly game. The rain fell hard as we crossed the castle gates. Servants rushed to take the horses, casting curious glances at me and the king, both drenched and dressed like commoners. We entered through a side door, avoiding the main corridors where courtiers might see us. Return to your chambers and change, the king instructed, his voice low. Speak to no one about where we've been. Tonight we will continue your instruction. I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. As I turned to walk down the corridor, he lightly held my arm. Lara! There was an unusual intensity in his eyes. Trust is a rare luxury in this castle. Choose carefully in whom you place yours. With these enigmatic words, he quickly moved away, his tall figure disappearing into the dimness of the corridor. My walk to the chambers was uneventful, but when I opened the door, I immediately realized something was wrong. The room had been searched, subtly but noticeable to someone who, like me, had spent years observing details to survive. The books on the small desk were aligned differently, the rug slightly displaced, the bed made with folds that were not the usual ones. Frost came to meet me, agitated. His blue eyes seemed to want to tell me something. Immediately, my hand went to my neck, where the crystal still hung beneath my wet clothes. At least that was safe. I entered the adjacent sunroom where the pups usually stayed. Mist and Echo were there, but something about their behavior was different, more alert, almost defensive. I approached the window trying to organize my thoughts when I noticed a small shining object on the sill. A hair clip adorned with a small sapphire, identical to those Lady Elise used to wear, so that was it. The ladies had been here rummaging through my belongings, looking for something to incriminate me, or perhaps just to humiliate me, to find secrets that could be used against me. The clip had been left deliberately, a warning, a reminder that no matter my new title, I was still a target. I changed out of my wet clothes, opting for a simple but elegant dress. As I combed my still damp hair, I heard a soft knock on the door. Frost immediately became alert, his silver fur bristling. "Come in," I called, cautiously. To my surprise, it was Master Aldrich who appeared, his wrinkled face more serious than usual. "Luna," he said, closing the door quickly behind him. "Forgive the intrusion, but we have little time." "What happened?" I asked, alarmed by his urgency. The old tutor looked around, as if fearing to be overheard. Eleanor convened the Privy Council this morning. While you and the king were absent, she presented evidence that you were using forbidden arts to manipulate the king's mind. My blood ran cold. Forbidden arts, accusations of witchcraft, were rare in the kingdom, but when they occurred, they almost always ended in public executions. What evidence? I managed to ask, my voice firmer than I felt. A servant testified to having seen you gathering strange herbs at midnight. Another swore she heard you reciting enchantments. He shook his head in disgust. Fabricated accusations, obviously, but enough to plant doubt in the minds of the more superstitious councillors. And the king? Does he know about this? Not yet. Eleanor carefully planned to act during his absence. When he returned, she had already prepared a document requesting your arrest for investigation, awaiting only the royal signature. My heart pounded. So that's why the king had warned me about trust. He suspected Eleanor would make a move in his absence. What should I do? I asked, feeling the weight of the situation fall upon my shoulders. Master Aldrich approached, lowering his voice further. The king instructed me to tell you that you must appear in the throne room tonight. When the tower bell tolls 9 times, come alone and bring the crystal. I looked at him, surprised. How do you know about the crystal? A sad smile touched his wrinkled lips. I served your grandfather, child, even before I served our king. I know the secrets of your lineage better than you do. This revelation caught me off guard. So Master Aldrich wasn't just a randomly assigned tutor. He was a connection to my past, someone who knew my family, who understood what was at stake. Why didn't you tell me before? Because knowledge is power, and power attracts danger, he replied, heading for the door. Some truths can only be revealed when you are ready to bear them. And I believe that now, finally, you are. With these words, he left as silently as he had entered, leaving me with even more questions than answers. Frost approached, rubbing against my legs as if sensing my distress. The hours until nightfall dragged with torturous slowness. I dined in my room, declining the invitation to the communal dinner. I didn't trust my ability to maintain composure in front of Eleanor and her allies, knowing what I now knew. When the first bell began to toll, I wrapped the crystal in a piece of velvet and put it in my dress pocket. Frost insisted on accompanying me this time, and something told me it would be wise not to refuse his protection. Together we walked through the silent corridors of the castle, the torches casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The throne room was empty and partially lit when we arrived. Only a few torches were lit, creating a play of light and shadow that made the atmosphere even more imposing and mysterious. Frost kept close to my heels, his body tense as if sensing danger. "You came," the king's voice echoed in the empty hall, surprising me. He emerged from the shadows near the throne, without crown or cloak, just a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Master Aldrich told me it was urgent," I replied, approaching him. "He told me about the accusations." The king nodded gravely. "Eleanor has finally shown her claws. I didn't expect her to be so audacious, but the presence of the Lycoi, your connection to them, accelerated her plans." "What does she really want?" I asked, stopping a few steps from him. "It can't just be political power. There's something more, isn't there?" A sad smile touched his lips. "Always perceptive." "Yes, there is much more at stake. Eleanor seeks something your family guarded for generations, something she believes will give her control over all the mystical creatures of the realm." "The amulet," I murmured, recalling the rumors about what my father might have hidden. "It's real then?" "More than real," he confirmed. "It is the key to the balance between our world and the world of ancient creatures. In the right hands, it maintains harmony. In the wrong ones." He didn't need to complete the sentence. The implication was clear. In Eleanor's hands, it would be a weapon. "And me? What is my role in all this?" The king approached, his grey eyes studying me with intensity. "You are the last of the lineage who can find and awaken the amulet. The crystal I gave you is merely a fragment, a key that responds only to your blood." Frost growled softly. Suddenly, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the hall. I turned quickly. in time to see a figure emerge from the shadows. Eleanor, her face a mask of cruel triumph. "What a touching secret meeting," she said, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "The servant and the king conspiring in the shadows, exactly as I suspected." More figures emerged behind her, guards with impassive expressions and, to my shock, Ambassador Kalin, whose eyes now gleamed with a malice he hadn't shown during the banquet. "Treason, Eleanor?" The king's voice was icy but controlled. "Is this what your loyalty of so many years amounts to?" The advisor advanced, her usual elegance now replaced by a predatory energy. "Loyalty? To a king who allows himself to be enchanted by a commoner? Who abandons the vision we built together because of ancient superstitions?" She pointed at me with disdain. "Look at her. A nobody. A traitor's daughter. And you elevate her above nobles who have dedicated generations to this kingdom." "My father was no traitor." The words escaped my lips before I could contain them. "The only traitor here is you, who ordered the death of innocent people." Eleanor laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Innocent? Your father and his lineage condemned this kingdom to stagnation with their primitive pacts and their refusal to use the power they had at their fingertips." She turned back to the king. "You know what I'm talking about, Alaric. You yourself once wished to break those ties, to unleash the true potential we have." Alaric, the king's name. It was strange to hear it, after so long thinking of him only as the king, or your majesty. It humanized him in a way, made the whole situation even more real and terrifying. I was young and foolish. "Eleanor," the king replied, his voice laden with regret, "seduced by promises of power without understanding the price. Your father showed me the truth, Lara." He turned to me. "He showed me what happens when we break the natural balance. That's why he died, not for betrayal, but for loyalty to the oldest and truest principles this kingdom has ever known." The ambassador stepped forward, his posture arrogant. "Poetic words, Your Majesty. But unfortunately, we have reached the end of your reign. The council has already been informed of your involvement with witchcraft, of the influence this girl exerts over your mind. When they find you both here, alone, the conclusion will be obvious." Frost growled louder, suddenly placing himself between me and the intruders. His body, still small, seemed to grow with the intensity of his presence. "So predictable," the king murmured, almost bored. "A coordinated coup using superstition and lies to seize power. I thought you were more creative, Eleanor." "Creativity is a luxury when it comes to necessity," she replied, gesturing to the guards. "Arrest them. The king will be confined until the council decides his fate. The witch will be judged at dawn." The guards hesitated, looking uncertainly at their monarch. One of them, older, stepped forward. "Lady Eleanor, arresting the king is an act of high treason. Treason is allowing the kingdom to fall under the influence of dark magic," she cut in. "Do your duty or face the consequences along with them." The moment of tension was broken by an unexpected sound, a long, piercing howl coming from outside the castle. Frost immediately responded with a howl of his own, surprisingly powerful for his size. The hall doors suddenly burst open, as if propelled by an invisible wind, and there, majestic against the moonlight that now shone in the night sky, were Mist and Echo. But they were no longer the pups I knew. They had grown, transforming into imposing creatures, their silver bodies gleaming like liquid metal, their eyes shining with an ancient intelligence. "Impossible," Eleanor whispered, recoiling a step. "They couldn't mature so quickly." "Time," the king said, a slow smile forming on his lips. "It's a flexible concept for the Lycoi, especially when they sense their Luna is in danger." Mist and Echo advanced into the hall, their movements fluid as water. Frost ran to join them, and before my astonished eyes, he too began to change, his body lengthening, his limbs strengthening until all three stood side by side, identical in their magnificence. "What's happening?" I asked, feeling the crystal warm in my pocket pulsing like a second heart. "They are answering your call," the king replied, approaching me. "It's what your lineage has always done, be the bridge between worlds." Eleanor had paled, but her determination remained. "Guards," she shouted. "Arrest them now. Kill the creatures if necessary." The guards advanced reluctantly, swords drawn. But before they could get close, a wave of energy emanated from the Lycoi, visible as ripples in the air. The crystal in my pocket exploded in bluish light, and I felt something awaken within me. An ancient knowledge. Words in a language I never learned but somehow knew. Words flowed from my lips without me controlling them. And with them came power, pure and wild as the forest itself. The hall floor trembled and the torches swayed violently, some extinguishing. Eleanor screamed an order in the same ancient tongue, and to my shock, Ambassador Kalen began to change, not like the Lycoi, into something beautiful and natural, but into something distorted and grotesque, his skin darkening and hardening like rotten tree bark. "Shadow Guardian," the king said, pushing me behind him. "So that's why Eastmarch sent an ambassador so readily." The creature that was once Kalen emitted a guttural sound, advancing toward us. The Lycoi formed a protective semicircle in front of us, their fur emitting an intense silver glow. "The amulet, girl," Eleanor demanded, her voice distorted by rage. "Give it to me now, and I will spare your miserable life." "I don't have the amulet," I replied, confused. "I never did." "Liar!" She advanced, her eyes glinting with a supernatural light. "The crystal is the key that reveals it. Your father hid it, but you carry the map in your blood. Always have." The king stood firmly between us. "Enough, Eleanor. This is not the way, and you know it. The amulet cannot be forced to serve ambition. It responds only to genuine need, to balance." The advisor laughed, a strange, broken sound. "Balance? Is that what you learned from the old fool? There is no balance in power, Alaric. There is only who controls and who is controlled." The Guardian advanced further, its claws extended toward us. The Lycoi responded with deep growls, the air between them and the monster crackling with invisible energy. It was at that moment that something strange happened. The crystal in my pocket began to burn, not with heat, but with an intense cold that seemed to penetrate to my bones. I instinctively took it out, and to my astonishment it floated above my palm, spinning slowly. A blue light emanated from it, expanding into a beam that pointed directly to the throne, not to the seat itself, but to a specific spot on the marble floor in front of it, where an ancient symbol was carved, so worn by time that it almost disappeared into the stone. "The sanctuary," the king murmured, his eyes wide with surprise. "It was here all along." Eleanor let out a cry of triumph, advancing toward the indicated spot. But before she could reach it, Frost leaped in front of her, his posture not aggressive but firmly protective. "Get out of the way, beast," she hissed, trying to push him aside with a gesture. To everyone's surprise, it was the king who laughed. "You truly don't understand, do you, Eleanor? Neither did I until now." He turned to me, his eyes shining with a new clarity. "Lara, you always wondered why you were spared that night, why you were brought to this castle." I nodded, unable to speak, the crystal's energy flowing through me like a cold current. "Because the amulet itself chose you, not as its guardian, but as its vessel." The shock of the revelation hit me like lightning. The memories the crystal had awakened earlier, the instinctive connection with the Lycoi, the ancient words that flowed from my mouth without me having learned them. "No, it's not possible," Eleanor stammered, her face contorting in fury and disbelief. "The amulet is an object, a physical relic." "It is much more than that," the king replied. "It is knowledge, it is balance, it is connection, and it cannot be stolen or taken by force. It can only be granted to those who prove worthy." The Guardian let out a roar, lunging toward us. Everything happened very quickly after that. The three Lycoi moved in perfect synchronicity, their bodies forming a circle around the king and me. The crystal in my hand exploded in light, no longer blue but white as the moon itself. Ancient words flowed through me, like a dammed river finally breaking its barriers. With each word, the light intensified, enveloping the Lycoi, then the king, and finally myself, in a shimmering cocoon. The Guardian collided with the luminous barrier and was violently repelled. its distorted body flung against the hall wall with a dull thud. Eleanor screamed something inaudible, her face a mask of hatred and fear. The guards recoiled, dropping their swords, some falling to their knees before the power that manifested. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything ceased. The crystal crumbled in my hand, turning into dust that danced in the air before disappearing completely. The light dissipated, and the hall returned to dimness, illuminated only by the few torches that remained lit. An absolute silence fell upon everyone. The Lycoi remained upright and vigilant, but the immediate threat had passed. The Guardian lay motionless against the wall, its grotesque form slowly reverting to the human appearance of the ambassador. Eleanor was on her knees, her face marked by a mixture of defeat and residual disbelief. "It's over, Eleanor," the king said, his voice gentle, almost compassionate. "The amulet has made its choice." She raised her gaze, her eyes meeting mine. And in that moment, I saw beyond the hatred and ambition, I saw a woman who, somehow, had lost her way, seeking power because she believed it was the only form of protection in an unstable world. "It was always her, wasn't it?" she asked softly, her voice broken. "From the beginning." The king nodded solemnly. The blood of the Guardian lineage, combined with a heart that chooses to protect the weak even under threat of death. There was no other choice possible. The guards, now recovered from the shock, turned to the king, awaiting instructions. "Arrest Lady Eleanor and the ambassador," he ordered. "They will face judgment by the council, but with justice, not vengeance." As the guards carried out their orders, the king turned to me, his eyes studying me as if truly seeing me for the first time. "Do you understand now what you are? What you always were?" I looked at my hands, still tingling with the energy that had flowed through them. The Lycoi approached, Frost nudging his snout into my palm in a gesture of recognition and loyalty. "I am the amulet?" I asked, the idea still difficult to comprehend. A soft smile touched his lips. "You are the bridge, Lara, between worlds, between times. The power Eleanor sought is not in an object, but in the blood, in the living connection between humans and ancient creatures. That's why your family was chosen as guardian so many generations ago, not to possess the power, but to maintain it in balance." I looked around the hall, at the guards who now bowed respectfully, at the Lycoi who surrounded me protectively, at Eleanor being led away, her gaze a mix of defeat and lingering fascination. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling the weight of the responsibility I had just comprehended. The king extended his hand to me, his gesture no longer that of a monarch to a subject, but of an ally offering partnership. "Now, Luna, we begin to rebuild what was broken, to restore the balance that was lost for so long." I accepted his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the silent promise of support and respect. Frost emitted a soft sound, almost a purr, pressing against my legs. That night, as the moon shone over the castle and news of the events in the throne room spread like wildfire, I finally understood the meaning of the title that had been given to me. Luna, not just a name, but a promise, a legacy, a responsibility. I, who was found trembling under the snow, I who served in silence, I who saved 3 small creatures out of simple, human compassion, now found myself at the center of something greater than myself. Greater than the kingdom, greater than time. And as Frost slept at the foot of my bed, his silver body gleaming under the moonlight streaming through the window, I knew that my true journey was just beginning. The path would be long and undoubtedly full of new challenges. But for the first time since the fall of my home, I no longer felt alone. I had found my purpose, my strength, my voice. I was Lara, daughter of Theon, descendant of the Guardian lineage. I was Luna, the bridge between worlds. And finally, after so long lost, I had found my true home.